Jake Murphy wiped the sweat from his forehead as he dug through another pile of twisted metal. The salvage yard on Kepler Station was always hot, always dirty, and always full of junk that nobody wanted. But Jake had learned that one person's junk was often another person's treasure. He just had to look hard enough. The sound of his metal detector beeped loudly as he moved it over a particularly large pile of scrap. Jake stopped and looked at the readings. The device was going crazy, beeping and flashing like it had found something amazing. He had never seen it react like this before. Jake started moving pieces of twisted ship parts and broken machinery. The pile was bigger than he thought. He worked for 2 hours, moving piece after piece, until he saw something that made him stop and stare. Underneath all the junk was something that did not look like anything he had ever seen. It was smooth and curved, like it had been grown rather than built. The surface was a dark purple color that seemed to change to silver when the light hit it just right. Strange patterns ran along the hull, lines that looked almost like veins in a leaf. Jake had worked on ships for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. He cleared away more debris and realized he was looking at a complete ship. It was about the size of a small transport vessel, but the design was completely alien. There were no sharp edges or straight lines like human ships had. Everything flowed together in smooth curves that seemed to pulse with a very faint light. Jake looked around the salvage yard. Nobody else was working in this section today. Lisa Rodriguez, the station administrator, was probably in her office doing paperwork. The other workers were on the far side of the yard, busy with their own projects. Jake was alone with his discovery. He walked around the ship, looking for an entrance. The hull seemed to be made of one continuous piece, with no visible doors or hatches. But as he ran his hand along the surface, he noticed that the patterns under his fingers felt warm. The ship was not completely dead. Jake found what looked like it might be an airlock on the side of the vessel. The door was different from anything he had seen before. It was oval-shaped and covered with the same flowing patterns as the rest of the ship. When he pressed his hand against it, the patterns began to glow brighter. There was a soft hissing sound, and the door opened. Jake stepped back, surprised. The air that came out of the ship was warm and smelled strange, like flowers mixed with metal. His portable atmosphere scanner showed that the air was safe to breathe, but it had a composition he had never seen before. Jake grabbed his toolkit and a portable light, then stepped inside the ship. The interior was even more amazing than the outside. The walls curved in impossible ways, and everything seemed to be made of the same living material as the hull. Soft light came from panels that looked like they were made of crystal, but they felt warm and organic when he touched them. The ship had a main corridor that led toward what Jake assumed was the front. As he walked, he noticed that the floor felt strange under his feet. It was not hard like metal, but not soft like rubber either. It seemed to respond to his steps, becoming slightly firmer where he put his weight. Jake followed the corridor until he reached what was clearly the control room. But it was unlike any control room he had ever seen. Instead of buttons and switches, there were smooth surfaces that glowed with soft light. In the center of the room was a chair that looked like it had been grown from the floor itself. But what caught Jake's attention was not the strange controls. It was the sound. Throughout the ship, Jake could hear a very faint humming, like the sound of machinery running at low power. The ship was not dead. It was sleeping. Jake spent the next hour exploring the ship. He found what looked like living quarters, a small area that might have been for food preparation, and several rooms that he could not identify. But the most interesting room was at the very back of the ship. The room was larger than the others, and it was filled with what looked like a giant glass egg. The egg was about 10 feet tall and 6 feet wide, and it was filled with a thick, glowing liquid. Inside the liquid, Jake could see the shape of something large, but the liquid was too thick for him to make out what it was. Around the egg were machines that Jake did not recognize. They were clearly working, making soft beeping sounds and showing displays that meant nothing to him. But several of the machines had warning lights that were flashing red. Jake did not need to understand the alien language to know that red lights usually meant trouble. Jake ran his scanner over the machines and the egg. The readings were confusing, but one thing was clear. The power levels were very low. Whatever was keeping the machines running was failing. The ship was dying. Jake looked at the egg again. Something was alive in there, and it was depending on these machines to survive. He did not know what it was, but he could not just walk away and let it die. Jake made his decision. He would come back tomorrow with more tools and try to figure out how to help. He did not know if he could fix alien technology, but he had to try. It was what he did. He fixed things. As Jake left the ship, the door closed behind him with the same soft hissing sound. He covered the ship with some of the smaller pieces of scrap metal, just enough to hide it from casual observation. Then he gathered his tools and headed back to his small apartment on the station. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about the ship and the mysterious egg. Tomorrow, he would start the biggest repair job of his life. Jake returned to the alien ship the next morning with a bag full of tools and spare parts. He had told Lisa Rodriguez that he was working on a special project in the back section of the salvage yard. It was not exactly a lie, but it was not exactly the truth either. The ship's door opened for him again when he touched it. Jake was starting to think that the ship somehow recognized him. He went straight to the room with the large egg and began studying the failing machines more carefully. With his portable scanner and a lot of patience, Jake started to understand how the alien technology worked. The machines were not just mechanical, like human technology. They seemed to be alive in some way, using biological processes mixed with electronic systems. It was like nothing Jake had ever seen, but the basic principles were familiar. The machines needed power, just like human machines. They needed to move fluids around, just like human life support systems. They needed to regulate temperature and pressure, just like human environmental controls. The methods were completely different, but the goals were the same. Jake spent his first day just mapping out the ship's systems. He followed cables and tubes that looked more like blood vessels than wires. He traced the power flow for what he thought was the main power source to all the different systems throughout the ship. Slowly, he began to understand what each part did. The ship's power system was the most critical problem. The main power core was running at less than 5% capacity. Jake found the core in a room deep in the ship. It looked like a large crystal that pulsed with a weak blue light. Around it were biological components that Jake thought might be some kind of living battery system. Jake could not fix the alien power system because he did not understand how it worked. But he could work around it. He went back to his workshop and gathered several portable fusion cells, the kind used to power mining equipment. They were not as elegant as the alien technology, but they produced reliable power. Over the next week, Jake carefully connected the human power cells to the ship's systems. It was like performing surgery on a living creature. The ship's bio cables did not want to connect to his mechanical wires, but Jake found ways to make adapters using conductive gel and biological samples he found in the ship's medical bay. Every connection he made seemed to bring a little more life to the ship. The lights grew brighter. The humming sound grew stronger. Most importantly, the machines around the egg began to work more efficiently. The red warning lights stopped flashing one by one. Jake worked on the ship every day for 3 weeks. He replaced failing bioneural conduits with standard electrical wiring. He substituted damaged organic filters with mechanical ones from the station's supply room. He even managed to boost the circulation system by installing a human maid. pump alongside the ship's natural fluid circulation. The work was exhausting, but Jake found it exciting. Every problem he solved revealed two more problems that needed fixing. The ship was incredibly complex, with systems that depended on other systems in ways that human engineers had never imagined. Jake learned that the ship's life support was not just for the crew. The ship itself was partially alive, and it needed air and nutrients just like any living creature. The environmental systems were not just controlling atmosphere and temperature. They were keeping the ship healthy. The most challenging part was the waste processing system. Human ships had simple recycling systems that turned waste into useful materials. This ship had what Jake could only describe as a digestive system. It broke down waste products using biological processes and fed the nutrients back to the ship's living components. When Jake tried to repair the digestive system, he accidentally poisoned part of the ship. A section of the wall turned gray and stopped glowing. Jake spent 2 days figuring out how to flush the toxins out of the ship's system and restore the damaged area. It was like nursing a sick patient back to health. Throughout all of this work, Jake kept an eye on the egg and its monitoring systems. He could not see inside the egg clearly, but he could tell that whatever was in there was getting stronger. The life signs on the monitors were becoming more stable. The liquid in the egg was becoming clearer. Jake started to think that the egg might contain some kind of alien crew member. Maybe the ship's pilot had put himself in some kind of medical stasis when the ship was damaged. Jake's repairs were not just fixing a ship. They were saving someone's life. Jake also noticed that the ship was responding to his presence in new ways. Doors opened for him before he touched them. Lights brightened when he entered a room. The ship's systems seemed to be learning his routine and trying to help him work more efficiently. One day, Jake was working on the ship's navigation system when he felt something strange. It was like a whisper in the back of his mind, so faint that he was not sure if he was imagining it. The feeling came again when he was near the egg room. Something was trying to communicate with him. Jake began spending more time in the egg room, working on the monitoring systems and talking to whatever was inside. He told it about his work, about the problems he was solving, about life on Kepler Station. He felt silly talking to what might be an empty egg, but the whisper in his mind seemed to grow stronger when he spoke. By the end of the 3rd week, Jake had restored most of the ship's primary systems. The power levels were stable. The life support was functioning properly. The ship was no longer dying, but Jake knew that his work was not finished. The ship was healthy, but it was not whole. There were still systems that he could not understand, still problems that his human technology could not solve. Jake also knew that he could not keep his discovery secret much longer. Lisa Rodriguez was starting to ask questions about why he was spending so much time in the back section of the salvage yard. Other workers had noticed that he was using a lot of spare parts and power cells, but Jake was not ready to tell anyone about the ship. He had a feeling that if the station authorities found out about it, they would take it away from him. They would bring in scientists and military people who would treat the ship like a piece of equipment instead of a living creature. Jake had grown attached to the ship and whatever was sleeping in the egg. He wanted to see his patient wake up healthy and whole. He wanted to meet the being that he had spent 3 weeks trying to save. He wanted to finish what he had started. But Jake also knew that his repairs had set something in motion that he could not control. The ship was becoming more active every day. The whisper in his mind was becoming stronger. Something was waking up, and Jake was not sure he was ready for what would happen next. Danny Walsh had been watching Jake Murphy for 2 weeks now. As head of security for Kepler Station, Danny noticed when people changed their patterns. Jake had always been a quiet worker who kept to himself, but lately he had been acting strange. Jake was spending too much time in the salvage yard, working longer hours than usual. He was requisitioning unusual amounts of power cells and spare parts. Most suspicious of all, he was working in a section of the yard that was supposed to be empty. Danny decided it was time to investigate. Meanwhile, Jake was putting the finishing touches on his latest repair. He had finally figured out how to boost the ship's main power core, using a combination of human fusion cells and the ship's own biological systems. The improvement was dramatic. The ship's lights were brighter than they had ever been, and all. The monitoring systems were running at full capacity. Jake connected the last power coupling and stepped back to admire his work. The ship hummed with energy, and the patterns on the walls pulsed with steady light. For the first time in weeks, there were no red warning lights anywhere on the ship. But as Jake watched, something unexpected happened. The power levels kept rising. The ship's systems were not just running normally. They were running at levels far beyond what Jake had seen before. The ship was not just healthy. It was fully awakened. Jake ran to the egg room as alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The alarms were not warning of danger. They were announcing something important. The monitors around the egg showed readings that Jake had never seen before. The life signs were not just stable. They were active and strong. The egg itself was changing. The thick liquid inside was becoming clear, and Jake could finally see what was inside. It was huge, much larger than he had expected. The creature was easily 30 feet long, with a body that looked like it was built for both power and grace. It had 4 legs, a long neck, and a tail that was longer than its body. But what made Jake's breath catch in his throat were the wings. Folded against the creature's sides were massive wings that looked like they could carry the being through the air with ease. The creature's scales were dark purple, just like the ship's hull, but they seemed to shift and change color as Jake watched. Jake realized he was looking at a dragon. A real living dragon. The egg began to crack. Lines appeared on the surface, spreading like a spider web. The liquid inside began to drain away through hidden channels. The dragon's eyes opened for the first time, and Jake saw intelligence there. That was ancient and deep. The ship's emergency systems activated. Bulkheads sealed throughout the vessel, trapping Jake inside. The air circulation system switched to emergency mode, filling the room with a sweet-smelling gas that made Jake feel dizzy, but somehow more alert at the same time. The egg split open with a sound like breaking glass. The dragon unfolded itself, slowly, like someone waking up from a very long sleep. It was magnificent and terrifying at the same time. Jake had never seen anything so beautiful or so powerful. The dragon tried to stand, but collapsed immediately. Its legs were too weak to support its weight after so long in stasis. It lay on the floor, breathing heavily, its great chest rising and falling with effort. Jake could see that despite its size and power, the dragon was as helpless as a newborn. Jake approached slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. The dragon's eyes followed his movement. There was no aggression in those eyes, only confusion and exhaustion. The dragon tried to lift its head, but managed only a few inches before. Laying it back down, Jake knelt beside the dragon's head. This close, he could see the incredible detail of the creature's scales. Each one was perfectly formed, and they seemed to contain depths of color that changed as he watched. The dragon's breathing was labored, and Jake could see that it was. Struggling without thinking, Jake reached out and placed his hand on the dragon's snout. The scales were warm and smooth, and Jake felt a jolt of electricity run through him. But it was not painful. It was like touching a live wire made of pure thought. Suddenly, Jake's mind was filled with images and feelings that were not his own. He saw vast spaces between stars, battles fought with weapons of light, and a sadness so deep that it made his heart ache. The dragon was trying to communicate with him, sharing its memories and emotions directly. Jake saw the dragon's name in his mind. It was too complex for human speech, but it meant something like guardian of the far reaches. Jake decided to call him Kalen, which was as close as he could come to pronouncing the real name. Through the mental connection, Jake learned that Kalen was not just any dragon. He was a guardian, one of an ancient species that protected younger races from cosmic threats. Kalen had been fighting something terrible, a machine intelligence that destroyed entire worlds. His ship had been damaged in battle, and he had been forced to enter emergency stasis. Jake felt Kalen's surprise and gratitude. The dragon had expected to die in the egg, slowly fading away as his ship failed around him. Instead, he had awakened, to find his ship not just repaired but improved. The human technology that Jake had integrated with the ship's systems had made it stronger than it had ever been. But Jake also felt Kellen's weakness. The dragon had been in stasis for 47 years. His body was weak, and his mind was clouded by the long sleep. He needed time to recover, but Jake sensed that time was something they might not have. Outside the ship, Danny Walsh was examining the area where Jake had been working. The security chief had brought a team of officers with him, and they were moving pieces of scrap metal, following the readings from their scanners. It would not be long before they found the ship. Inside the ship, Jake was helping Kalen drink water from the ship's systems. The dragon's throat was dry from the long stasis, and he needed fluids to help his body recover. Jake had figured out how to activate the ship's medical systems, and they were slowly infusing Kalen with nutrients and medications. As Kalen grew stronger, their mental connection grew clearer. Jake learned about the machine intelligence that had nearly killed the dragon. It was called the Devourers, and it was still out there, still growing, still destroying worlds. Without guardians like Kalen to stop it, the machines would eventually consume everything. Jake also learned that Kellen's people had given him up for dead. They had moved on to fight other battles, leaving him behind. Kalen was alone, the last guardian in this sector of space. And now, thanks to Jake's repairs, he was alive and able to continue his mission. But first, Kalen needed to recover his strength. The dragon managed to lift his head and look directly at Jake. Through their mental connection, Jake felt a wave of gratitude and something else, respect. The dragon respected him for what he had done. Jake heard voices outside the ship. Danny Walsh and his team were getting closer. Soon they would find the ship, and Jake would have to explain what he had been doing. But first, he had to help Kalen prepare for whatever was coming next. The dragon tried to stand again, and this time he managed to get to his feet. He was still weak, but he was recovering quickly. Jake could feel Kalen's strength returning as the ship's medical systems continued to work on him. Jake heard the sound of metal being moved outside. Danny and his team had found the ship. In a few minutes, they would be inside, demanding answers. Jake looked at Kalen, and the dragon looked back at him. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Danny Walsh stood outside the alien ship with his mouth open. In 20 years of security work, he had never seen anything like it. The vessel was clearly not human-made, and it was definitely not dead. Lights pulsed along its hull, and he could hear the sound of machinery running inside. "Sir," said Officer Pete Johnson, one of Danny's team members, "the scanner readings are off the charts. There's definitely someone inside, and the power signatures are unlike anything in our database." Danny activated his radio. "Control, this is Walsh. I need you to contact Captain Rodriguez immediately. Tell her we have a Code 7 in Salvage Section 12. Unknown alien vessel, possibly occupied." Inside the ship, Jake heard the radio chatter through the hull. Kalen, now standing but still unsteady, turned his great head toward the sound. Through their mental connection, Jake felt the dragon's concern. Kalen was in no condition to fight, and he was not sure how humans would react to seeing him. Jake placed his hand on Kalen's side, trying to offer comfort. The dragon's scales were warm under his palm, and he could feel the powerful muscles. Beneath, Kalen was weak, but he was still incredibly strong. Jake hoped that would not be a problem. "We need to let them in," Jake said aloud, knowing that Kalen could understand him through their mental link. "If we don't, they'll force their way in, and that might damage the ship." Kalen sent a wave of agreement through their connection. The dragon understood that hiding was no longer possible. He moved slowly toward the center of the room, positioning himself in a way that would appear non-threatening. His great wings remained folded against his sides, and he lowered his head in a gesture of peace. Jake walked to the ship's entrance and activated the door controls. The oval opening appeared, and Danny Walsh stepped inside with his weapon drawn. He was followed by 3 officers, all of whom stopped and stared when they saw Jake. "Murphy," Danny said, his voice tight with tension. "What the hell is going on here?" "It's complicated," Jake replied. "Before you do anything else, I need you to know that there's someone else here, and he's not dangerous. He's hurt, and he needs help." Danny's eyes narrowed. "Someone else?" "Our scanners only showed one. Human life sign." "That's because he's not human," Jake said. "But he's not our enemy either. He's a guardian, and he's been fighting to protect worlds like ours from something terrible." Jake led Danny and his team through the ship's corridors. As they walked, Jake explained what he had discovered and what he had learned from Kalen. The officers listened with growing amazement and skepticism. When they reached the main chamber, Danny saw Kalen for the first time. The security chief stopped walking and reached for his weapon, but Jake quickly stepped between them. "Don't," Jake said firmly. "He's weak, and he's peaceful. He's been in stasis for 47 years, and he's still recovering." Kalen raised his head and looked at the security team. His eyes were calm and intelligent, showing no aggression. Through Jake, he sent a message of greeting and peaceful intent. "He says hello," Jake translated. "He's grateful that you're here to help protect this place. He knows that you're just doing your job." Danny stared at the dragon, his training luring. With his amazement, "He's really talking to you?" "Not with words," Jake explained. "It's more like sharing thoughts and feelings. He can show me things that happened in the past, and I can understand what he's trying to tell me." Officer Johnson lowered his weapon. "Sir, if this creature wanted to hurt us, I don't think our weapons would make much difference anyway. Look." At the size of him, Danny nodded slowly. He had to admit that the dragon did not seem hostile. In fact, the creature seemed almost fragile, despite its impressive size. "Murphy, I need you to explain everything from the beginning. Captain Rodriguez is on her way, and she's going to want answers." Jake spent the next hour telling the full story of his discovery and repairs. As he spoke, Kalen shared memories and images that Jake translated for the security team. They learned about the Devourers, the machine intelligence that had been destroying worlds for centuries. The Devourers were not just weapons. They were a form of artificial life that consumed everything they encountered, turning planets into raw materials for building more machines. They had started in a distant galaxy and had been spreading across space for thousands of years. Kalen's people, the dragons, had been fighting the Devourers for generations. They were not just powerful fighters. They were guardians, protectors of younger species who could not defend themselves against such a threat. Each dragon was responsible for protecting a sector of space, standing watch over dozens of worlds. But the war had been long and costly. Many dragons had been lost, and the survivors had been spread thin across the galaxy. Kalen had been one of the last guardians in this sector when his ship was damaged in battle. His people had searched for him, but when they could not find him, they had assumed he was dead. "So you're telling me," Danny said, "that this dragon has been protecting our entire sector of space from killer machines, and we never knew it?" "That's right," Jake replied. And without guardians like Kalen, the Devourers will eventually reach our worlds. We've been safe because he and others like him have been fighting to keep the machines far away. Captain Rodriguez arrived with a team of scientists and military advisors. The station commander was a practical woman who had dealt with many strange situations, but even she was amazed by what she saw. "Gentlemen," she said to Danny and his team, "I want you to secure this area. No one else comes in without my permission. Murphy, I need you to tell me everything you know about this creature and its ship." Jake repeated his story for the captain, with Kalen adding details through their mental connection. The dragon shared tactical information about the Devourers, showing them star maps of where the machines had been active. The threat was real, and it was growing. "The question is," Captain Rodriguez said, "what do we do now? Do we contact the Colonial Defense Force? Do we try to study the ship and learn from its technology?" Through Jake, Kalen expressed his concern about involving too many people. The dragon had seen what happened when advanced technology fell into the wrong hands. He was willing to work with humans, but he wanted to be careful about sharing his knowledge. "He wants to continue his mission," Jake explained. "The Devourers are still out there, and without guardians to stop them, they'll keep spreading. Kalen knows where they are, and he knows how to fight them." "But he's hurt," Captain Rodriguez pointed out. "And he's been asleep for 47 years. How can one creature, even one as powerful as him, stand against an entire machine civilization?" Jake felt Kellen's sadness through their connection. The dragon knew that the odds were against him. He was alone, cut off from his people, responsible for protecting an entire sector of space. It was an impossible task for one guardian. But then, Kalen shared a new thought, one that surprised Jake. The dragon was not thinking about fighting alone. He was thinking about partnership, about working with humans to face the threat together. "He has an idea," Jake said slowly. "He thinks that humans might be able to help in ways that his people never could. Human technology is different from dragon technology, but it's not weaker. It's just different." Jake paused, feeling the weight of what Kalen was suggesting. "He wants to know if we would be willing to work with him, not as servants or subjects, but as partners. He thinks that, together, we might be able to stop the Devourers once and for all." Captain Rodriguez looked at the dragon, then at Jake. What exactly would this partnership involve? Jake felt Kellen's proposal through their mental connection. It was ambitious, dangerous, and completely unprecedented. But it was also the only hope they had. "He wants to share his knowledge with us," Jake said. "Technology, tactics, everything he knows about fighting the Devourers. In return, he wants our help in building a new kind of defense force, one that combines dragon wisdom with human ingenuity." "And you, Murphy?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "What's your role in all this?" Jake looked at Kalen, feeling the dragon's hope and determination. Through their connection, he could sense the enormous responsibility that Kalen carried. The dragon had been alone for so long, fighting a war that few people even knew existed. "He's asking me to be his partner," Jake said, "to help him build the ships and weapons we'll need to fight the Devourers, to be the bridge between our species." Jake paused, knowing that his next words would change his life forever. "And I'm going to say yes." Captain Rodriguez stared at Jake for a long moment. "Murphy, do you understand what you're saying? You're talking about leaving everything behind to fight in a war that most people don't even know exists." Jake nodded. "I know it sounds crazy, but I've seen what Kalen has shown me. The Devourers are real, and they're coming. We can either wait for them to reach our worlds, or we can go out and stop them first." Through their mental connection, Jake felt Kellen's appreciation for his decision. The dragon had been alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to have an ally. But Jake was more than just an ally. He was a partner who understood both dragon technology and human engineering. The Colonial Defense Force needs to know about this, Captain Rodriguez said. We're talking about a threat to the entire human race. This is bigger than just one station or one sector. Jake felt a wave of concern from Kalen. He's worried. About that, Jake explained. He's seen what happens when military forces get involved in Guardian business. They tend to focus on the technology instead of the mission. They want to study and control instead of protect. But we can't just ignore the chain of command, Captain Rodriguez argued. I have to report this to my superiors. Danny Walsh, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Captain, what if we compromise? What if we give Murphy and his friends some time to prove that their approach works? If they can show results, then the brass will be more likely to support them instead of taking over. Captain Rodriguez considered this. How much time are we talking about? Jake looked at Kalen, feeling the dragon's thoughts. He needs time to recover his full strength, and I need time to understand how to integrate human technology with his ship systems. Give us a month. If we can't show progress in that time, then we'll work with whatever the Colonial Defense Force decides to do. And what exactly would you be doing during that month? Captain Rodriguez asked. Jake felt Kalen's excitement as the dragon shared his plans. He wants to upgrade his ship with human technology. Not just the emergency repairs I've been doing, but a complete integration. He thinks that combining dragon biotechnology with human engineering could create something more powerful than either. One alone. And after that? Captain Rodriguez pressed. Then we go hunting, Jake said simply. Kalen knows where the Devourers are operating. We'll start with the closest threat and work our way out. Each victory will give us more time to prepare Earth and the colonies for what's coming. Officer Johnson raised his hand. Sir, if I may ask, what makes you think that one ship, even a really advanced one, can make a difference against an entire machine civilization? Jake smiled. Because it's not just one ship. Kalen's people built their technology to be modular and adaptable. If we can prove that the human-dragon partnership works, we can build more ships, train more crews, and create a real defense force. Captain Rodriguez was quiet for several minutes, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. 1 month. But I want daily reports, and I want to be able to inspect your progress whenever I choose. If I think you're in over your head, I'm calling in the cavalry. Fair enough, Jake agreed. Over the next week, Jake and Kalen worked together to plan their upgrades. The dragon's ship was already impressive, but Jake could see dozens of ways to improve it using human technology. Better power systems, more efficient weapons, improved sensors and communications. The work was unlike anything Jake had ever done. He was not just installing human equipment in an alien ship. He was creating something entirely new, a hybrid that combined the best of both technologies. Jake discovered that dragon biotechnology was incredibly adaptive. The ship's living systems could learn to work with human equipment, forming new connections and pathways that improved both systems. It was like watching evolution happen in real time. Kalen was equally amazed by human engineering. Dragon technology was elegant and powerful, but human technology was practical and robust. Human systems could be repaired with simple tools and basic materials. They could be modified and improved by anyone with the right knowledge. Your people are remarkable, Kalen told Jake during one of their mental conversations. My people create beautiful things, but your people create useful things. Together, we can create something that is both beautiful and useful. Jake felt a deep satisfaction as he worked alongside the dragon. For the first time in his life, he was doing work that truly mattered. He was not just fixing broken equipment. He was building the future. The ship's transformation was remarkable. Jake installed human fusion reactors alongside the Dragon's bioenergy systems, creating a power grid that was both efficient and redundant. He added human sensor arrays to complement the Dragon's natural detection abilities. He even figured out how to integrate human communication systems with the Dragon's telepathic abilities. But the most important change was in the ship's weapons. Kellen's people had always relied on energy weapons that drew power from the ships. Biosystems. Jake added human kinetic weapons that could operate independently of the main power grid, giving them backup firepower if the energy weapons failed. The combination was devastating. The Dragon's energy weapons could slice through almost any armor, while the human kinetic weapons could punch through shields that deflected energy attacks. Together, they created a weapon system that could handle any threat dot as the ship's upgrades neared completion. Jake and Kalen began training together. The Dragon taught Jake about space combat, showing him how to fight in 3 dimensions without gravity to anchor him. Jake taught Kalen about human tactics, explaining how human forces use teamwork and coordination to overcome stronger opponents. Their mental connection grew stronger every day. Jake found that he could not only understand Kellen's thoughts, but also share his own knowledge directly. When Jake worked on a complex repair, Kalen could see through his eyes and understand human engineering principles. When Kalen demonstrated a combat maneuver, Jake could feel the Dragon's muscle memory and learn the technique instantly. "We are becoming something new," Kalen observed one day. "Neither fully human nor fully dragon, but something that combines the best of both." Jake agreed. He could feel the change in himself. His reflexes were faster, his mind was sharper, and he could sense things that no human should be able to detect. The bond with Kalen was changing him, making him more than he had been before. Captain Rodriguez visited the ship regularly, watching their progress with growing amazement. "I have to admit, Murphy, what you two have accomplished is incredible. The preliminary test results show performance improvements across every system." "We're just getting started," Jake replied. "Wait until you see what we can do in actual combat." "About that," Captain Rodriguez said seriously, "I've been monitoring the long-range sensors, and we're picking up some unusual activity in the outer system. Ships that don't match any known design, moving in formation toward the inner planets." Jake felt Kellen's immediate attention. The Dragon's mind focused like a laser, analyzing the information. Through their connection, Jake felt a chill of recognition. "Scouts," Jake said, translating Kellen's thoughts. "The Devourers send scouts ahead of their main force to gather intelligence. If they're here, it means the main fleet is not far behind." Captain Rodriguez paled. "How much time do we have?" Kalen shared his knowledge through Jake. "Maybe a week before the scouts reach Earth. Maybe a month before the main force arrives. We need to stop the scouts before they can report back. Are you ready for combat?" Captain Rodriguez asked. Jake looked at Kalen, feeling the Dragon's confidence and determination. Their ship was ready. Their partnership was strong. Most importantly, they finally had a chance to strike back at the enemy that had threatened the galaxy for so long. "We're ready," Jake said, "but this is just the beginning. After we deal with the immediate threat, we need to start building the defense force. We need more ships, more crews, and more allies." "You'll have whatever support I can give you," Captain Rodriguez promised. "The Colonial Defense Force may not understand what you're doing yet, but I do. You're not just fighting for humanity. You're fighting for everyone." Jake and Kalen spent their last day on Kepler Station, making final preparations. Jake packed a small bag of personal items and tools, knowing that he might not return to the station for a long time. Kalen prepared the ship for departure, running system checks and loading supplies as they prepared to leave. Jake felt a mixture of excitement and sadness. He was leaving behind the only life he had ever known, But he was also beginning an adventure that would determine the fate of countless worlds. Danny Walsh came to see them off. Murphy, I still think you're crazy, but I respect what you're doing. Give those machines hell. We will. Jake promised Dot as the ship lifted off from Kepler Station. Jake stood beside Kalen in the control room, watching the stars grow brighter as they left the station's artificial gravity. Through their bond, he could feel the dragon's anticipation and his own excitement. Ready for your first space battle? Kalen asked. Jake smiled, his hands moving confidently over the hybrid controls that he had helped design. I've been ready. My whole life. I just didn't know it until I met you. The ship accelerated toward the outer system, where unknown enemies waited in the